Well, we do have a few minutes for some comments and discussion amongst the panel. And I'll come over and join you in a second, but to sort of get us going, I think it's very interesting how the three speakers have connected three important domains. It's trying to link the natural environment with where people live, with the people themselves. So we've got this nexus. Janet talked particularly about the power of the natural environment, how to protect and preserve that. Gil talked about human conurbations or cities, about how we can actually turn them into a force for good health rather than ill health. And David brought through very strongly that this can only occur through partnerships with people and thinking very much about the agendas that people have for their own social and economic and health development. So we have this sort of nexus, and we need to move forwards in partnership. So it's this theme of partnerships I'd like to pick up with first, and perhaps ask them if they've got a key message about how do we develop meaningful partnerships with all the key stakeholders to move forward. So perhaps, Janet, I might start with you. I mean, do you have any sort of key ideas or experiences about developing partnerships?
Well, I guess the naturescape in Kings Park that's a Rio Tinto Kings Park Botanical Gardens is a partnership. Kings Park developed the idea based on what I was talking about, that children need to have experiences in nature they need to know about nature if we want them to care about nature. They came to Rio, who are very involved obviously in the economy of Western Australia through their mining projects, but also in their support through the Rio Tinto Futures Fund of Conservation Volunteers Australia, who work on rehabilitation projects all over the place, but on some of the mine sites and so on. And Rio were keen to develop their image, I suppose, as a caring company. Most of the things that Rio's involved in are maybe 2,000–3,000 kilometres away from Perth, so it was very convenient to have something within the city of Perth that would show Perth people that they are a caring company. And I think that's one of the things with partnerships, that on the one side of the partnership, the people who are the mendicant ones, if you like, need to find requests to make that benefit the other guys, the guys with the money, as well as the people who are needing the money. So in that instance, it was a corny expression, but it was definitely a win-win, because Kings Park, like all, I assume Victoria and other national parks organisations are the same. They don't have much money, government funding is very tight. So they needed the funds to do this. They had the idea. Rio, it's right in the line of what Rio's interested in. And they were able to be seen in the capital city of the state as being a company. So I think win-win is an important aspect.
But Gil, I mean, partnerships are also quite hard to manage, and they're often quite difficult, tricky partnerships. I mean, what's your experience of building partnerships?
I think it's important to convey the message that it has to be, as you said, a win-win. For example, I think that parks have to build broad alliances and showing that it's a win-win. For example, I think key partners for parks is the business community. And the business community is interested in having good people. And I was saying during the talk that cities around the world are competing on how to retain their best people and how to attract and retain. And on this, we're not talking about quantity, but we're talking about quality. I mean, Australia is so far ahead in the world that if you open your doors for 24 hours, you can double the population. But it's not quantity, it's quality. It's Melbourne retaining the best people, the best carpenters, the best engineers, the best medical doctors, and each city in South Africa, in Colombia, in Canada, everywhere in the world, and I think that's one of the roles that the parks, so we gotta tell the business community, if you invest in parks, this is gonna be good in the long term for the business. From public health, I think that there is no public health system in the world that will be able to survive if it's only curative. It has to be preventive. So we also have to make the case. There is so much money being invested in curative health and so little in preventive. And we gotta make the case. So I do think that partnerships are very, very important, but we also have to be generous and realize that parks cannot do the whole role. Parks have to be able to attract and be able to bring others on board. In order to make the case, we have to make the case to be relevant so that even in times of economic crisis, the funding of parks will continue to increase and be sustainable. People will realize that it's good for the environment and it's good for the public health and it's good for the economy, in addition of being good for recreation.
So David, how did you develop your partnerships? I mean, what was the success factor that made it so good?
We were quite aware of the tendency to have catchphrases, fad statements, fashions. We wanted to break from that mold and establish a sustainable program to unlock this green capital so that it is shared. It only becomes meaningful if it is shared with communities and society at large. And the levels of sharing it are quite different. It was quite a rocky start, and I think in terms of the entire transformational process, we've only done a quarter of what we need to do in the next 60 years to transform South Africa into an equitable and winning nation. It was not smooth sailing. We've created a program, we've spent money to appoint people to work with communities, and we've actually opted for people coming from those communities so that they speak the language that is understood by those communities, and instead of talking above their heads. Partnerships are always difficult to manage, but they can only succeed if there is that genuine and true commitment between the system and the people that it serves.
I mean, one of the issues also is about developing political will. In fact, Gil, I think you used the word during your presentation, and to get the will of the people and the politicians and our leaders. So let's just talk about political will. I mean, you introduced it. I mean, how do you develop political will? I mean, how do you win it and sustain it?
I think that we have to take advantage of democracy. And I think that is one of the benefits of democracy. So if people are doing what we think is right, they should be elected and re-elected. If not, they should be changed for others. And people have to participate. I mean, politics is not a dirty word. People have to be engaged because at the end of the day, the main decisions are being taken by the decision makers. So I think that at some point, we have to develop advocacy group. The community has to get organized. When people say in some places that the squeaky wheel gets the oil, then the parks people have to become the squeakiest of the squeaky wheel. And have to be very relevant, and you always have to remember that if you are not writing the letters to the local papers, if you are not making the phone calls, if you are not going to the public meetings, someone else is. And that someone else is setting the agenda. So I think that the parks people also have to do the work in getting the community engaged and letting the politicians know that all of these things are important, and hopefully electing people that will have the general interest in mind and not necessarily who's the most powerful or who's the